Pay close attention. The news you are about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, a lot going on in the news today between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. Also, a mysterious drone shot down in Turkey, thought to be Russian. And we continue our reporting on the ongoing violence between the Israelis and the Palestinians. More stabbing attacks by Palestinians and even some British nationals attacked by Israeli settlers. But first, who or what is to blame for one tragic murder after another in the United States? John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, believes mental illness plays a big role in mass killings in this country. Now, in a recent interview with CBS, he points out how there is little help for families caring for the mentally ill. He said, as soon as I read about Chattanooga, for example, and you read about Aurora, Colorado, a lot of it is just mental illness. I mean, these are people who have gone untreated, who have somehow fallen through the cracks, he said.
Interesting. He continued mentioning the attack of a Virginia senator by his own son who was diagnosed with bipolar disease, saying, I looked at horror and read the stories of cray deeds being stabbed by his son because he couldn't get him into an emergency bed in the hospital. Well, after that happened, I told our folks in Ohio, we're going to have emergency beds. We're going to treat the mentally ill. Part of this problem is very unstable people. After Gus Deeds stabbed his father 10 times, he went inside his house and committed suicide by shooting himself.
But the problem of mental illness and tragedy of countless lives lost may be exacerbated by America's deadly passion for pills. Now, shocking new data coming from the National Center for Health Statistics says more Americans die today from prescription drugs than car accidents. Now, why would this be? Well, there is growing concern that pharmaceutical firms are more focused on profit, Katan, if you can believe that, more focused on profit than on that of the lives of people.
Yeah, well, that's no surprise right there. Today, a widespread fondness for pharmaceuticals has turned the U.S. into a nation of pill poppers. But now, or how have people come to even know about these drugs, much less start taking them? Well, it's simple, really. The U.S. is the only Western country that allows direct-to-consumer advertising of prescription drugs. In other words, pharmaceutical companies can advertise directly to the public. And so that's making people more aware of the many various different prescription drugs on the market.
Well, as a result, we see numerous commercials advertising diseases that a person might have, such as depression or bipolar disorder. According to the U.S. government, antidepressant use among Americans has increased nearly 400% in the past 2 decades, and published reports finds that 1 in 5 adults take at least one drug for mental health disorders. And Katan, that's 20% of the U.S. population taking a drug.
That's amazing. Now, with over $14 billion in annual sales, antipsychotics remain America's top-selling therapeutic class of prescription drugs. Dr. Harriet Fraud, a mental health counselor and hypnotherapist, believes Big Pharma has manufactured a climate of insanity by manipulating and even creating illness for capital gain. In an interview with RT, she explains the advertising strategy is to have vague diagnoses and then find wiggle room so that that diagnosis will apply to pretty much everybody, making everybody the perfect candidate for this particular drug.
Wow. Well, one ad warns people with deficit hyperactive disorder, or ADHD, if left untreated, adults were 2 times more likely to end up divorced. And another commercial promises to make you happier while causing possible side effects such as dry mouth, insomnia, sexual side effects, diarrhea, nausea, and sleepiness.
Critics say the legal drug trade occurs when pharmaceutical companies shower doctors with gifts, cash kickbacks, and research funding in exchange for endorsing or prescribing the latest and most lucrative drugs. Dr. Fraud says many doctors have become drug hustlers, looking for the slightest sign of sadness to prescribe an antidepressant. She says they're given out like M&Ms.
Wow. Well, as a result, in 2014, prescription drug abuse became the #1 cause of accidental deaths, with more than 30,000 Americans overdosing. So death is a real risk in taking these drugs, as well as a long list of side effects, which are usually minimized in the commercials by the lower spoken voice at a rapid speed, or the very fine print in magazines, which most people probably skip over.
Yeah, so they make that less the focus of
Absolutely.
benefits of getting this drug. But in some cases or instances, the side effects alone may make life worse than the disorder the drugs are being taken for in the first place. One example is Seroquel, a bipolar medication which generated $4.4 billion in sales in 2014, and listing all its side effects during a commercial requires 49 seconds of airtime, ending with these. High blood sugar has been reported with Seroquel and medicines like it, and in extreme cases can lead to coma or death. Well, that's a side effect I don't think anybody's looking for.
Another area of concern is children and antipsychotics medications. Now, the number of young users has doubled in the past decade. Literally, millions of American adolescents are taking drugs like Adderall to treat hyperactivity. Bruce Levine, a clinical psychologist, says all these drugs are very, very similar to illicit or illegal drugs, except more dangerous. Now, he said, chuckling a little bit, he said marijuana is a little bit safer. Well, we know, Catan, that marijuana has that mind-altering effect, so you can imagine what these other drugs are capable of doing. If he thinks that the marijuana is the lesser of the two.
Yeah, lesser of the two evils, so to speak.
Right.
Well, Dr. Levine goes on expressing the biggest problem for children and their families, but kids have no choice. He says they're being forced on these by doctors who are telling parents it's the best thing for them when often it's not. So you're going to have a lot of angry, resentful kids growing up in America here, and it's already happening because of them. But America's most profitable pharmaceutical company, Pfizer, isn't stopping with men, women, and children. It now manufactures antidepressants, forget this, Jeff, animals.
Animals. Wow. However, selling drugs does not come without a price. In 2009, the pharma giant paid $2.3 billion to settle civil and criminal allegations that it illegally marketed one of its drugs. It was the largest healthcare fraud settlement and criminal fine to ever been paid by a U.S. drug company. Now, seemingly a big win for Americans, but the fines reportedly amounted to less than 3 weeks worth of Pfizer drug sales. So hardly enough to even make a dent in that huge company.
Oh, yeah.
3 weeks worth of their
just
sales.
A drop in the bucket. Dr. Fraud explained this further, saying the money is so huge that these fines are immaterial, and they're not thinking about the social effects of what they're doing. They're thinking about the profits they accrue. The pharmaceutical industry remains the most profitable business in the United States. Probably the most depressing fact on the matter is there will always be more success and financial gain for these companies as long as more Americans are encouraged to take drugs.
Well, moving now from big pharma to big agriculture, particularly poultry farms. As the worst outbreak of avian influenza in U.S. history spreads across the Midwest, eggs could go way up in price. The deadly virus has surfaced in 15 states, killing 45 million chickens and turkeys. The deaths have already led to shortages, causing egg prices to soar. Now, the effect on wholesale prices has been the most dramatic price increase that I've ever seen in 40 years, said Dr. Tom Elam, president of Pharmaceuticals LLC, an agricultural and food industry consulting firm.
The wholesale price of shell eggs nearly doubled in the month of May. The prices of products which contain eggs surged 145%. Now, most shoppers have yet to see the cost hikes as stores are still using old contracts set at lower prices, but that will change in the coming months. Analysts say consumers could see prices go up not only for table eggs themselves, but for the many products that use eggs as ingredients like pasta, bread, and ice cream.
When this takes place, some shoppers say they'll think twice before buying. Now, companies, too, are already searching for solutions. The American Bakers Association says 24% of industrial egg production has now stopped, and it wants the U.S. government to allow temporary egg imports to increase production again. Experts say replacing the flocks in this unfolding disaster could take years.
Wow. Well, from eggs to ice cream, Blue Bell ice cream specifically. A recent report by CBS News brought forward complaints from former Blue Bell creamery workers concerning filthy working conditions at a Texas factory. The factory was linked to an outbreak of listeria, but as an investigation has found, the outbreak has been going on for years. 10 people were made sick from the bacteria, and 3 of those died.
Richard Porter and Tina Ediger were patients at Via Christi St. Francis Hospital in Wichita, Kansas, when they were both infected with listeria. Dr. Tom Moore, who was involved in the treatment of Ediger and Porter, said, "I think the public has an expectation. I think a reasonable expectation that when they come to the hospital, that the food that's given to them at the hospital is safe."
Right. Both patients had been sickened by contaminated Blue Bell ice cream. While Porter survived the infection, Edgar did not. Dr. Moore believes the food safety system in place failed his patients. FDA records show Blue Bell's own testing found listeria in its Oklahoma plant as far back as 2013. However, the laws at the time did not require Blue Bell to share that information with regulators.
When asked if the current food safety laws do enough to protect the most vulnerable Americans, Michael Taylor, the FDA's Deputy Commissioner for Food, told CBS, "Well, we don't think they do enough to protect all Americans, and that's why we have the 3,000 deaths we have annually from a wide range of pathogens."
Wow. Well, our coverage shifts now from ice cream to mudslides, and our correspondent Larry McGee has our story on environmental disasters, chemical weapons in Parliament, and the latest news on Russia. Larry, fill us in on the latest details.
In the southern parts of the Sunshine State, abnormal rains caused floods, which ultimately resulted in huge mudslides. Hundreds of vehicles were bogged down in the mud along the highways east of Los Angeles, and road crews were occupied for an entire day trying to clear away the mire and vehicles in an effort to reopen the roads for travel. The floods are reported to have come within a matter of moments, following abnormal rainfall pouring down at 4 inches per hour, which subsequently produced massive mudslides. 20 feet of mud and rocks lifted semi-trailers off the highway, and rescue teams scrambled to probe beneath the mire for any cars which might have been completely buried with survivors. Oddly enough, at the same time, other parts of California were being pounded by hail the size of golf balls. Workers report that it could take days before the mud, car, and debris are removed, but they are working feverishly to do so because more rains are expected. What one might not expect, however, are the leaders of a nation being so unable to cooperate with one another that tear gas is set off in a parliamentary meeting to express disagreement for the second time. Members of the Parliament of Kosovo and reporters cleared the building, gagging, as grenade after grenade was lobbed onto the parliament floor. Certain lawmakers are said to be upset concerning a deal with Serbia, which would grant more independence to areas where Serbians are the majority. Kosovo's ethnic Albanians broke away from Serbia in an armed revolt in 1999. They then declared independence in 2008. And while most Western nations recognize Kosovo, Serbia and Russia do not. The Russian bear is also still on the mind of America these days, as the U.S. is reported to be updating its plans for any potential act of aggression by Moscow. The former Undersecretary of Defense recently conveyed that the U.S. had to brush up on its strategies after the conflict in Ukraine emerged. According to the former Secretary Michelle Flournoy, it was Russia's activities in the east of Ukraine that triggered the reassessment, which is geared towards responding to any assault on NATO members. This is reportedly the first time since the breakup of the Soviet Empire that the U.S. is reviewing its war plans for a possible confrontation with Russia. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Gatan, Jeff, back to you.
Gatan, I'm not sure how the leaders there, you see, in what they did in Parliament, could expect anything different from their people if they, the ones that are supposed to be giving them guidance, act that way.
That's right.
Well, there have been more clashes between Palestinians and Israeli troops in Bethlehem in the West Bank. Protesters threw stones and Israeli troops responded with stun grenades and tear gas. Israeli police shot and killed a Palestinian man suspected of premeditating a knife attack. An Israeli woman was also stabbed. Her attacker was shot dead.
That's right. Since the start of October, 8 Israelis and 13 Palestinians have been killed in this latest round of violence. A group of Palestinians barricaded themselves inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and their claim was that Israel was trying to take over what is to them a sacred site.
Israel's response? Deploy hundreds of police. Now, those attacks have spread to various places across the West Bank. Not even foreigners are exempt from attacks. One such man, a British volunteer, told of his scary attack from several Israelis.
David Amos said in Nablus, where they were, 8 settlers attacked him and 2 of his colleagues. Even though he says he vocalized that they were foreign volunteers or foreign nationals, they threw stones at them as well as kicked them when they were down on the ground. Amos said they knew they were internationals, but even if we weren't, the attack was no excuse, and it was a blatant attack.
Those Israeli attackers were later seen vandalizing a car belonging to a Palestinian. As tensions increase, Israeli forces are bolstering checkpoints as well as calling up 1,400 border police reservist officers and 850 reservist officers reactivated for duty. At checkpoints throughout the Old City, police presence is greater along with metal detectors. Now, police are checking paperwork of people of Arab descent coming through that area.
That's right. Also, entrances to Arab communities, roadblocks have been set up there. The Israeli government has also released that they will not return the bodies of Palestinians accused of carrying out terrorist attacks as a preventative means of them being hailed as martyrs. Critics say that this may backfire because closing off Arab areas will cause the anger and violence to increase and give strength to grassroots movements.
This third intifada is a movement from the ground and is being spread through social media, and most of the participants are young people.
Well, concerning Syria, people aren't sure how the Obama administration is going to respond to Russia's involvement in that area. Juan Zarate, a senior national security analyst, said Russia is forcing the moves on the battlefield, bringing with them air power, military power, and now ground troops led by the Iranians to go after the opposition.
They, as a result, are now forcing the U.S.'s hand in the matter, and now instead of the passive stance that the U.S. had been taking, they are now going to have to draw some battle lines. So as a result, the U.S. is going to drop weaponry more aggressively to opposition forces that they've already been supporting. Now, as a result, those weapons will be used by the U.S.-supported forces to fight not only against Assad, but the Russians as well. So kind of a very tense situation starting to brew there.
Yeah, especially since they are both members of the quartet. It seems like they're really kind of at odds with each other on many, many issues, namely this issue in Syria. Well, Zarate continued, the U.S.'s main goal is to continue to support those troops who are fighting Assad and the Islamic forces, while ISIS, in the meantime, is moving closer to a major city, which is Aleppo, which he said the Russians aren't doing anything about. Well, the Russians are dictating what is taking place on the ground, and that's forcing what the Americans are able to do militarily, and the diplomatic options that come up, if any do, will now have to go through Moscow.
Another factor is that the Iranians are involved in this battle as well, supporting Assad along with Russia with ground troops, while Russia supplies air support and political muscle. Zarate said Putin's game plan in war is use brutal and overwhelming force, as well as go after the moderates and alternatives to the ruling regime first, and thirdly, change the narrative to where it's the regime and what we're doing, or you have the violent radical extremists. So they're saying that's right, one or the other.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Moscow is denying claims that Turkey shot down a drone near the Syrian border, that it was in fact a Russian drone. That's what they're denying. General Andrei Kartopolov, Operations Directorate of Russia General Staff, said recently reports appeared on the internet alleging that our Turkish partners shot down a Russian drone. But all our drones are located either in the region they are operated or in the high imminent air base.
Turkey says it shot the unidentified drone flying into its airspace after giving 3 warnings before shooting it down with its fighter jets. A U.S. official said that it was Russian. Now, Turkey didn't specify how the warnings were given. The drone crashed 3 kilometers in Turkish territory.
And lastly, Russia is making an appeal to the International Monetary Fund to help Ukraine pay off its gas bill. Vladimir Putin urged the IMF to give Kiev a $3 billion loan to pay off its debt with Russia. Speaking at a government meeting, Putin said that Kiev failing to pay its debt by December deadline would be considered a default.
Russian Finance Minister Antoine Sinuanov said that Russia is preparing a concrete action plan in case Ukraine does indeed default. Now, Russia has been blocking the IMF's $17.5 billion rescue for Ukraine, which restricts Kiev's ability to restructure billions of dollars in debt, including some held by Moscow. In February, Kiev urged Russia to restructure Ukraine's debt and to negotiate more favorable borrowing terms. Now, Moscow, in return, refused to request, saying that it needs the funds to boost their economy.
Well, foods that cause sickness, crazy environmental extremes, and war, more war, and more war on the horizon. If all these things have you wondering, what can you do to save yourself and your family? You don't have to look any further than the House of Yahweh. Contact the House of Yahweh and request your free Prophetic Word magazine as well as the monthly newsletter. Here's how you can do that.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also check out our new website, www.ypnnews.com. And to email the House of Yahweh, send your emails to info@yahweh.com. And for any calls coming outside the United States, please call the number on your screen.
Well, don't go anywhere. Grab your pencil, your paper, and the Holy Scriptures if you have it. And stay tuned, because up next is Yisrael Hawkins, the only one authorized to bring forth the solution of peace. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Hemmerman.
Thank you for watching.